All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to get started, and if anyone else joins in along the way, we will be having Q&A at the end. So I'm Jeff Poole, along with Troy, Bell, Megan, and Peter, your team here at Wealth Analytics. And today's webinar is on cybersecurity. We'll be holding Q&A today after the presentation, and if you do have a question, feel free to type it in the questions box, and we'll make a note of it and either address it along the way if appropriate, or we'll wait until the end of the presentation. Just to clarify, this is a Zoom webinar. This is a little bit different than maybe some of the Zoom meetings you've been having with your family and friends online. So in this case, your cameras and microphones are not going to be active. You are going to be muted while we present so we can get through the presentation. And that way at the end, we'll be able to open it up and address all the questions at that time. So with that, right now, every single minute, every single second of our lives that we're on our phones and our computers, there are people trying to gain bits and pieces of information about us online. So today, we're going to teach you how you can better protect yourself with your personal information. Our guest speaker, Dan Skiles, has been a business partner with us for over 15 years. Dan is president of Shareholder Services Group, SSG as we often refer to it, and is involved in all aspects of managing the firm. Prior to joining SSG, Dan was with Charles Schwab, where he was responsible for technology solutions. Dan is a leading expert who recently completed 10 years of writing a monthly technology column for Investment Advisor magazine. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our dear good friend, Dan, and we'll start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to see you guys virtually, and to everybody out there listening, thank you for joining us today. First of all, I hope that you're well and that you're safe in this, this unique and challenging environment. And I don't know if you realize, but today is July 15th, which is actually tax day. I never thought I'd ever say that in my career, that July 15th would be tax day instead of April 15th. But here we are, and needless to say, at my firm, it's one of the busier days of the year. That is kind of being in the middle of summer, we don't normally expect, but this is obviously a very unique year with COVID-19 and the delay of filing taxes. So today is, here we are, tax day in the middle of the summer. So my goal today is to give you some tips and tools, steps to help you protect your information. I'll share some stories and some guidance. And then, as Jeff mentioned, love your questions. I know it might be a little bit different in this format, so feel free to type them out, and then we'll do the best we can as we work through them. But again, the overall goal is to give you some idea of how to better protect yourself and really awareness. So we're going to talk about your identity and how do you protect that information. How can you maybe remove it from sites and also the social media channels as well. And then, of course, I want to share some best practices too, just overall security best practices. We get, at Shareholder Service Group, we have the pleasure of supporting Wealth Analytics, and now we support well north of 1,600 independent advisors across the country. And given that size and scope of our firm, we get great visibility in what's going on out there and what we might be seeing from a cybersecurity front. We also, as Jeff mentioned, I spent a lot of time out on the road before pre-COVID, meeting and conferences and those type of things. And so the good news, I guess, in this area is there's a lot of sharing that goes on across the profession, from advisors to firms like myself, making sure we're all helping each other as it relates to protecting you and ultimately your money. So let's go ahead and dive in. And the first thing I want to talk about is protecting information and discussing, some of the key things that you probably already think of. Passwords, and maybe you have your own unique passwords, or maybe use like a LastPass or something like that. I really want to encourage you to have unique passwords. I know sometimes we can get in the habit of using the same password across multiple platforms. Let me tell you a story on why that's maybe not a great idea. There's a lot of reasons why, but this recent story actually happened to me. And about, during this COVID time, in April timeframe, I got a random email to my personal email address that said, I know your password, didn't say what site it was from, but it said, I know your password and I'm going to compromise your information. And then it displayed a password, which actually was one of my passwords. But the good news, because I use unique passwords across multiple platforms, I knew immediately which platform had been hacked. And because I saw the password that they had. And the good news, too, is that I had actually recently changed that password because the platform had been hacked and actually was announced to the general public. It certainly made the news. And so when that happened, I went in and immediately changed my password. And the one they used was my old one. Now, had I had the same passwords across multiple platforms, it would have been really challenging for me to understand which platform was actually hacked. Was it the one that I saw the news story on where I changed my password, or was it another one? And so that was obviously an eye-opening situation, but also was helpful the fact that I knew which password site that was tied to. And so then therefore I was able to zero in on the potential risk. We also want to talk about how important it is about sending your information securely, realizing that as we use different channels, whether it's email or websites, that we're always sending it securely and exchanging it, whether it's even portal sites like ShareFile and other solutions. It's also really important to only use computers that you control. And part of the reason why is because what happens is virus software can be installed on a computer and a keylogger type program. And if you don't control that computer, if you're not aware of how they're doing their virus and software to protect it, very easily information can be on there that's going to gather what any work was done. So anytime you see a computer at a hotel or a public location, you really never want to use that for anything that's important. Now, I always say they're great for checking the weather and sports and the news, but really nothing else. No personal information or any sites that you have for any of those computers. You only want to do that on devices that you control. And that also turns to the up-to-date antivirus software, because whenever there is a breach or a challenge, the antivirus software companies react quickly to make sure their products are up to date to prevent that from happening. And so you always want to make sure that it's turned on and active on your computer, whether you're running a Windows-based machine, Apple or Mac iOS-based machine. Just having the technology to support you with the up-to-date of the operating system, which they handle, and you should be accepting those updates, or the antivirus working within the platform as well. But unfortunately, as I say here on this slide, it's not enough in today's world. These things are great first steps, critical, foundational in everything that you do, but it's not enough. And so let's dive in a little bit more, because your information is readily available on the internet, based on activity that occurs in your life when you buy a house or refinance a house or other public documents. There's sites that are gathering information and making it available on their site. Sometimes they sell that information for prospecting and other sources out there. But it's readily available out there, and that certainly then helps the identity thief and to start their fraud attempt, if you will. And it also allows the con artist to try to impersonate you and try to use that data, that information, whatever their attack is, to help convince someone that they're really you and maybe try to get them to do something. It also could detail how and where you spend money, depending on the activity that's going on and what you're doing. And then, of course, too often we can be too comfortable. We're too comfortable about what might be out there or not out there. I'll share a quick side story on this one. One time, several years ago, my wife got a phone call from somebody that she went to high school with, which is, they're not a bad person, but unfortunately they're a little bit emotionally unstable and have had challenges in that regard. And we were trying to figure out, how did he get her phone number? This is many years after high school. She, of course, is now married to me. Her last name had changed. And as we dug into it, it turned out that the way that he got the phone number was actually through Facebook with my mother-in-law, and connecting with her on Facebook very innocently, because my family, my wife and I and our kids, aren't on Facebook. And so as we dug into it, that was kind of a fun conversation, right? With the mother-in-law talking about giving up our personal phone number to someone that my wife hadn't spoke to for many, many, many years. And we had to deal with it. It was an interesting time where he was calling on a regular basis, just trying to, if you will, rekindle, friends in high school. But again, my mother-in-law was very comfortable on Facebook and very comfortable sharing our contact information without even thinking about it, thinking, what the harm. And so that's the key thing, is sometimes we're just way too comfortable in what we're doing and who we talk to on the internet. So when that happened, we started to dig into what other information is out there about us, and I will tell you that what you want to do is go to several sources. Certainly, starting with Google is a good place to enter in your information, put in your name, maybe even put in your address, and see what comes up. See what different sites come up and what they might show about you, and it can be very eye-opening. I will tell you, also sticking with my family, my father-in-law is a very private individual. He's the type of person that shreds everything, as you would expect. He's the type of person that is very cautious about how they write checks and the pens that he uses. But he's also not a big internet type user. And so when I showed him, when we typed in his name and the different things that came up, he was truly surprised. And it was all related to some of the public sites, when they refinanced their house or bought a rental property, or those type of things are all part of the activity. And some of those actually had his phone number, which he was really focused on never publishing. And so you want to look for sites like mylife.com and White Pages and Spookio and see what information they have, and then do the same type of searches with your family members. I use my father-in-law as an example, because if you followed his search, you would actually then ultimately point to me and my wife, even though we have a different last name. And so that was very eye-opening and interesting too, as it relates to how they kind of link the family tree, if you will, all on very public sites. And so that's the first thing you want to do, is just know what's actually out there. And then once you've done that, you want to start thinking about the cleanup process. And I gave you an example here of mylife.com. This is one of the sites that has information. This is a site that also, just for the record, that will actually sell you a subscription to remove the information, but they also have a free solution. And so I'm not trying to tell you that you should buy their subscription. There's other ones that I'll mention here in just a little bit, but it is one of the more common sites that has information out there. And they do have ways for you to work through their site for free. Perhaps you want to subscribe to it, although I have other ones I want to mention. But you might be really surprised at what they show. And of course, there is a little bit of marketing to this, right? My Life is going out and gathering all this information through the different public sites and then putting it on their site, and then turning it into a quote unquote business, both for removing information as well as making that information available to others. And so you want to start with their privacy policy on each of these sites. And generally speaking, this provides instructions on how to remove your information. And certainly years ago, that's what I did, is for many of these sites, as I went through and worked with their privacy policy, saw how they said that we could remove information. Just so you know, most communication is done via email or a specific removal page. And you got to watch your spam folder, because one of the things I noticed is I would submit the request, and then they would send me an email confirming that that's what I wanted to be done. So it wasn't like they did it automatically in every site. They would send that follow-up confirmation email, which at that point, then I would have to confirm. So keep that in mind too, as you go through this process. Watch that spam folder, because that might be an email you're not looking for, and it could get easily filtered somewhere else. So that's the process that you can do on your own. And again, starts with that privacy policy. Or they have like a removal button, is what I noticed through a lot of these sites. And then what you'll notice is as you start diving into this, you really want to fight back and stop the companies from tracking you and understanding, how things are linked together. And that leads to just so much work that we do that you might want to consider hiring a service provider to do the work for you. As I mentioned, My Life has a little tool. I mentioned here a Bind, which is part of the Delete Me solution. They have a Delete Me solution. That's actually the service I used a number of years ago. I don't use it today. We got through that period and got enough done and haven't had any issues since. But that's the one that I ended up using, and it just depends on how concerned you are. And if you really think there's extra risk depending on what's going on, and so and how active you are too in the work that you do, and like I said, the overall risk. So there might be a lot of work there, and that's where you might hire one of these service providers, but it's not a requirement. As I said, you can do it yourself, but the challenge, of course, is you got to stay on it. It's not like one of those things where you do it once and you're done. The information can return just based on public record updates, depending on what's going on in your financial life with your home or other things. Public records can show up again. Even the littlest things, like, one of the things I noticed is community groups that we're a part of, especially tied to the school, that they would post information about how to contact us based on our work with the school, whether we're the treasurer for the PTA or the parent foundation, and then that would go up on their website. And then what do you know? One of these services would scan and find that, and then would include that information now on their site. So those are things that sometimes can happen that you just thought, wow, I never knew that being, the treasurer of my school's PTA and my contact information would now be more readily available to anybody, even though it was on their website. So, and that's what some of these services do. So think about that. You might want to hire a firm if it's not a ton of money. If I remember correctly, it's around $100 for the year is what I paid. And so it just depends on how important it is and how much work you want to do yourself. And then, of course, we've got the Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and all these different tools that we use to communicate, especially now in this COVID world where a lot of us are in a lockdown type environment. We're probably much more active on social media. But it's really important to understand the security settings. Like, for example, am I able to see what you're doing without knowing you, and Facebook, Instagram, and others are good examples of this. Is it only for your friends and your contacts, or can anyone see it? And that's really critical because we have seen, as we call them, the fraudsters. That's not a unique term for us. That's what everyone seems to call them in the profession. We have seen the fraudsters very active on monitoring social media to gather information, and then that gets them to help guess your password or your security questions, or even impersonate you with others. For example, if I have lots of pictures of my dog Rocky on my Facebook page, and someone tries to log in as me through a bank website, and one of my security questions is, what's the name of your dog? Obviously, I just made it much easier for them to guess that name is Rocky. And so, needless to say, Rocky is not any of my answers for any of my security questions, even though that could be another risk area. So keep that in mind too about how they link those things together. We see it especially on impersonating information as it relates to someone's traveling, and they're on their trip and they're posting things about their trip and seeing different family members, and then what do you know? One of the family members gets a message from a fraudster impersonating that family member who's traveling and saying, oh, I need help. I'm in New York right now and I need some help, and and the story starts. And if you're not in tune to what's going on, obviously you can be fooled. And we've certainly read and heard of those stories as well. So always think about what's out there on social media, and most importantly, who is it available to? Who can see it? And is it available to everybody? Or have you locked it down where it's just mainly your contacts? Now, on Twitter, keep that in mind. Twitter is available to anybody. They can just simply Google your Twitter handle, if you will, your name on Twitter, and they should be able to see a lot of your tweets. So keep that in mind, too, that some of the platforms don't even offer the ability to lock it down, if you will, so that others can't see it that don't connect with you. So just remember that as you use these different platforms and the information you put out there. I want to dive into a couple of security best practices now, and I hope you're thinking about some of your questions as I go through some of these areas. But a big one that we all use is Wi-Fi connections. And we really want to be careful about using free networks. And we want to always evaluate the security, and that should directly influence what you're willing to do on that network. So as we started this, we talked about using devices that you control and how important that is. Well, Wi-Fi networks can be in the same type of category. If I go to a restaurant or a coffee shop or those type of things, when we're allowed to do that again, I guess someday, and I start using their network, is there a security password required to be on it? Is it free for everybody? Those are things that would certainly impact the level of security. And then you also want to watch out for what we call man-in-the-middle attacks. And what man-in-the-middle means is we could be at Starbucks, and the Starbucks Wi-Fi could be, a Starbucks free Wi-Fi. That might be the name of the network. But I could be there too with my computer and create my own network with my computer and create a network called free Starbucks Wi-Fi. So I just moved the word free from the beginning of the network to the end. And so now essentially you have two networks, right? So you have Starbucks free Wi-Fi and you have free Starbucks Wi-Fi. Well, the one I created, the free Starbucks Wi-Fi, everything goes through my channel. So whatever anybody's doing, I can see it because they're using my connection. So you always want to be careful when you go to one of these places. And if you haven't used it before or been there before, you always want to ask the question, what is the name of your network? Because again, especially in very public, like airports and large locations, this is where these things can happen. Now, I don't want to scare you. It's important to recognize this, but I don't want to scare you. Most of the time when there's a man in the middle, it's a technology person just having fun, but not all cases. And even if they're having fun, do you really want them to see what you're doing and what you're logging into? And so that's why it's always critical to know what network you're connecting with. And then also, if you do travel a lot, if you are using a lot of Wi-Fi connections outside of your home or your business, you might want to think about just simply using the personal VPN or the personal Wi-Fi tied to your phone, whether it's AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, those sources, because the good news is when you use those devices, you are getting the benefit of their security and their network, and it is consistent. And so that's certainly something to keep in mind if you do travel a lot or you are using multiple Wi-Fi networks that you don't directly control. And especially tied to what you're doing. What are you doing? Are you logging into financial websites? Are you logging into personal information? Those type of details always influence the extra security that you want to have in the event there is a breach. And so that's why thinking about Wi-Fi connections and how you connect, and especially being aware of the man in the middle is so critical. We've all probably heard about or seen or know about email fraud. And this has been going on for years and certainly has picked up quite a bit in this environment, in this COVID world. But what's continuing to evolve with email fraud are gone are the days where you could see that email and you just knew right away this is fraud. They had some misspellings in it. It wasn't proper grammar. It was clear that it was what we call a phishing expedition, trying to fish out there and see what they get. But now the fraudsters have become much more patient and much more clever in how they handle the communication. The impersonating the communication style of the business contacts, of friends, of family members. And it's now more, as we like to say, spear phishing, where it's a direct attack, where they're very, very deliberate in what they're trying to do. And I've seen some of these emails, whether it's on the business side or on the personal side, where they've just figured out exactly how people like to end their emails, different terminology they use just based on their demeanor. And it's because they've been monitoring the email for a while. They've been seeing how this individual communicates because they've already compromised the email. And in the past, once they compromised it, they would try to do their attack. They'd just go for it. But now they'll be patient and they'll take the time. And so that's why whenever you're communicating on email, especially as it relates to any financial transaction, it's always best to pick up the phone and confirm information. I can tell you about stories, just being in this profession, where a client has dealt with a fraud attack from their real estate agent or from the escrow company or someone that actually is impersonating an advisor, even though it's not the advisor. And so you always want to think about what is the request and think about just pick up the phone. And especially if there's any financial transaction involved, extra to protect yourself. Because I can tell you in the scenarios that I've been involved with and the ones that we've seen and also working within the profession, the ones that unfortunately were successful fraud attacks, if someone had picked up the phone, it wouldn't have happened. They would have been stopped and would have been solved. And so just always keep that in mind as it relates to how you communicate with friends and family. And when it's time to do a transaction, think about, okay, how sure this. I had a situation with this with a friend of mine a while ago, just last year actually. We're putting some funds together for a birthday gift for one of our friends that was turning one of those magical ages, right? One of the bigger numbers, and we're all pulling our funds together to get him something good. And we were using, the on the bank side, using some of the tools that are available to send money, and he was doing this all via email. And I said myself, as we went through this, I said, hey, wait a minute, Dan, you remember what profession you're in. You remember, your technology roots. And I picked up the phone and I called him. His name was Scott. And I said, Scott, we got to make sure that we're all dialed in on this and just can't simply do it over email. Because if someone just changes that number once and we don't notice it, that money is gone. And so we changed our practice all over, everyone contributing $50, $100 to get a really great gift for this person having that magical age. So keep that in mind too as you think about email fraud. When they do their email fraud, they generally often tie it to a wire request. And some of the things that it's important to always know about wire and wire fraud is the big one. And that's that banks can deposit the money based on the account number alone. So even though we tell them, here's the account number and it's for the benefit of Dan Skiles, if that account number does not match my name on their side, they can still deposit or move the money. So if I say I want to send a wire to my Wells Fargo account or my Chase account or my Bank of America account, and I give the account number and then my name, but I'm off on the account number, when it gets to the other side, they can still deposit in the account even though the name and the account number don't match. Because there's an old rule out there from the Federal Reserve that says the account number is good, you can continue with the request. Now, some banks will kick it back. Not in all cases, not every time, but in our business, we have seen it where they will kick it back and say there's a mismatch. But again, it's not required. And the fraudsters know this. And they know that if they even say it's going to Dan Skiles, but the number's different, they know once they get in that account, they can move it again quickly and move it again quickly. And what they'll do is do 4 or 5 hurdle moves to get the money out. And then that makes it much harder once you realize there's a fraud attack to get the money back. And that's why the money moves really, really fast. And so that's why it goes back to my comment before on emails. Always you want to verbally confirm the instructions. And right now, this is a big challenge in the real estate business with escrows because the fraudsters love when there's multiple hands involved in a transaction. It's one thing when it's just you and me and we're just working together, but it's another thing if you had a real estate agent, the escrow company, the bank, these different entities, because the fraudsters realize that they can maybe infiltrate one of those and then sure enough, change that number real quick. And fortunately, that side of the business is picked up on this and a lot more practices come in place, and it's all about that verbally confirm. But unfortunately, you might have read actually a local story here in San Diego last year where a couple, I think the number was $250,000 they lost in a wire fraud related to a transaction to buy a house. And the challenge is it's hard to get the money back when it happens. It's not impossible, but it is challenging because, like I said, they move the money quickly. And then a couple other things you want to think about as it relates to security best practices. You always want to activate two-factor authentication if it's available on a platform. It's something that I use extensively across all the platforms that I work with, and it's really helpful. And so what that is, and I'll show a quick slide, you probably know about it, but what that is if I log into a site, it's going to send me a PIN code to a text message to my cell phone, give me normally a 6-digit number to be able to put that in to get into the site. You can also have the site trust you. Like, for example, my personal email, which is Gmail, I have that turned on, where if someone tries to log into my Gmail account, it actually sends a text message to me with the code if it's not a device that I said I trust. And it works great. I have to tell you, I actually caught my son once. I was away from the home, and I was working away, and also I got a text message from Gmail of my code, and I thought, well, that's strange because I'm not trying to log in right now, and so of course I immediately thought of family, and I thought about my teenager who's in high school, and called him immediately and said, hey, are you trying to log into my Gmail account? And he goes, oh yeah, did you get that? Yeah, I was looking at buying something, and it was tied to your Gmail account. I'm like, time out. I want to know more about this. But again, because I had two-factor authentication set up, that's how I became aware. And so you always want to keep that in mind as an extra option. The key thing too on this, by the way, as it relates to two-factor, and then is always remembering your physical security too, right? File server, the documents, all these different things that you have, even mail that you get. There's things that the fraudsters can use to try and impersonate you when they pick up the phone and trying to use that information. You probably know about credit card surveillance as well. This is where you can get a text message based on different types of activity, whether your credit card was used without it being present. That would be like an online transaction. Certain dollar amounts is very helpful. I actually, it was about 2 years ago, I had this set up, and someone had got my number on one of my credit cards, and because I started getting these text messages, it alerted me to call the credit card company right away, and we were able to shut it down, and of course they got me a new card. I would expect them to catch it too, but I always like to be in the know. But I'll caution you on this one too, by the way, especially if you have other family members that share the number. I got in trouble because I found out what my Christmas present was because I got a text message, and I called my wife and said, hey, did you just spend X amount at da-da-da? And she goes, yes, that is your Christmas present. So always keep that in mind as you think about, what some of these messages and who else is using the card and those type of things. And then, of course, the phone controls. We all deal with the spam, and you want to block those anonymous calls, and you want to route specific numbers to voicemail so you're not bothered. But a couple key things on this one, too. One, you want to make sure that whoever you work with, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, that they have a password on your account, because you never want someone to call impersonating you and trying to take over your number, I should say, and that's where having a password when you call those service centers is so important. The other thing to keep in mind too, and this is something that has started to show up a little bit more, especially in the last 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer. If you ever get as you're working with a bank or whoever, and let's say they call you to check in on something, which they rarely do. So that should always make you very suspicious. But one of the latest fraudster attacks is the fraudster will call and say, hi, I'm calling from ABC Bank, and I want to confirm some transactions I'm seeing on your account. And already your suspicions are up, and you might say to them like, well, I don't trust this. I don't know why you called me, and the fraudster will say something like, I can appreciate why that makes you uncomfortable. I'll tell you what, let me send you a PIN number directly from our system to your cell phone, and then you can give that to me, and then you'll know that it's safe. And so, sure enough, a PIN number will now come to a text message will come to your phone. And you'll see it's from, the bank, and you'll say, yeah, I just got it. And the fraudster will say, okay, tell me what the number is. And you'll say, yeah, it's 123456. That's right. Yeah, great. Okay. And then all of a sudden you feel comfortable. But what you didn't realize, what the fraudsters have just done, and this is something that is starting to be more reported, is what they are actually doing is they were on the bank website, and they did a password reset, and the bank's website, one of their technologies was to send a text message to confirm the request. And then you just gave that PIN number to the fraudster. They never knew what it was, but you just gave it to them, and now they're going into your bank account and doing their fraud attack. And it'll take you a couple of days to figure out, because now all of a sudden you're locked out because you just tried to log in. And so therefore, never, ever give out information that you get in a text message to anybody who calls. And always you call the bank. Always call their main number. Never let them call you. And especially as it relates to, if it's not knowing, if it's not someone you know. Like obviously, when you work with our firm or when you work with Wealth Analytics, you know everybody. You know these individuals. You know my name. That's different. It's with the big companies where it can be very challenging, where they have thousands and thousands of employees, that you get that phone call and you really don't know who, Dan or Steve or Julie is. And so that's one of the fraudsters have figured out with using the PIN number to get into accounts. And so just be extra careful on those type of things as well. And tying that together, right? That dual factor authentication is just an example of what it looks like, and then in the text message. But again, you want to make sure you're the one controlling it, and you know why. You never want to be giving that information out, only for when you're logging in and confirming requests and those type of details. So just really important to think about. So with that, I want to say thank you. I've enjoyed this. I'm sorry I can't see you. I would love to have done this in person in another time, but we are in the world that we're in right now. So with that, Jeff and the team, I'm open to questions.
All right, well, let's get started. So thank you so much, Dan. Always a great refresher. And I always pick something up every time I listen to cybersecurity. I feel like we've been, every year over the last decade, it just continues to evolve. And it's just like going to the airport. Things have changed over the last decade there, and they'll continue to change. And we appreciate you sharing some of these tips. So one of our first questions had to do with using a master password type of company. I think it's something like LastPass that I've used myself. Do you have any comments on the pros and cons of using some kind of master sign-in password company for all of your passwords?
I think they're great tools. There's different ones that you can use. Obviously, the key thing is about how you set up your credentials on if it's LastPass or some of the others, making sure that's set up to the right level of security. And then, of course, you're trusting that provider, and they've done a good job in regards to protecting that information. So I think they're a good tool. I think it's important to just think about, how many sites are you actually using, and for me, I've just created a lot of hard, unique passwords across the platforms I use, and I have them stored securely, and that's just my preference. But again, LastPass and others do something very, very similar, and a great tool if that works well for you. But if you do that, or you do my plan, that's great. Please don't be using the same password across multiple platforms, because that example I gave you right in the beginning, as I said, if I had used the same password across multiple platforms, it would have been really challenging, pretty much impossible to figure out which one was hacked, and all the work that would be required to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. How about best practices, considerations for using a credit card online?
Well, so a couple things on that. So, one, definitely, and this is what I've learned just traveling around. I've heard a couple FBI experts speak, and they always talk about how if you are going to buy something online, I always want to use a credit card over a debit card, because of the rules related to if there is a fraud on your credit card, the risk is much lower to you as the consumer, is what they shared at this conference I was at. And then what I've done is there's with my family, there's a certain credit card we use for online purchases. And so it's different than the other ones we have. So if we have a Costco credit card, we use that obviously for Costco and other things. But if we want to buy something online, maybe we use the Chase credit card, or maybe we set it up for Bank of America. And that just allows us to have a little bit more controls and know that if something ever went south or got compromised, we have it's not impacting all of our accounts. And then, of course, I always have that feature turned on that says that the credit card was entered in or not available. It sends me a text message. So it's pretty amazing. Whenever we buy something online, whether it's Amazon or another site, how quickly I get that text message of the transaction. And that obviously that surveillance gives me a little bit more comfort.
Next question was, will the Orion portal ever use two-factor authentication?
So I think it's for one of your team members. I know you guys were looking into that.
I'm going to jump in on this. So if you would like multi-factor authentication enabled, which is when it sends you the text to your cell phone, message me, bell@wealthanalytics.com, or anyone on the team, and we can turn that on for you. The client portal in general is a safer portal, simply because you can't request any money on there. There's not much you can do. It's just numbers and information. But that still gives people a lot of power, hackers a lot of power. So if we can turn it on, just message me and I will go ahead and turn that feature on for you.
Thanks, Belle. Next question, what is your advice on freezing credit at the 3 agencies?
I think it's a good idea. Of course, you have to think about, are you going to be applying for anything? Are you going to be refinancing your home, or are you going to be needing to use that credit to buy anything? And if you do, then you have to realize there's a little bit of a time to unfreeze it. Oftentimes, I understand it's about 24 to 48 hours, maybe quicker. But I don't think it's a bad idea, especially if you're not that active. The other thing too is just watching, right? There's ways to see those reports on a regular basis through a number of sites now. And so I think it's important to keep an eye on that as well. Again, it depends on your behavior. If you've got a loan coming up or going to be borrowing money, maybe you don't want to freeze it just yet, but once it's done, and you probably won't have that much activity after that, not a bad idea.
And how about all these robocalls that we're getting on our mobile phones now? Are these just marketing campaigns, or is there an actual security risk associated with these phone calls?
Well, I don't think there's an actual security risk unless you do something, right? You know, the reality is if you send it to your voicemail, or, you know, just so you know, my practice, if I see a number that comes in, I mean, oftentimes I won't answer it, but if I happen to answer it, you know, this is the days where you're polite on those calls. So and you can tell there's always a little bit of a delay. If you answer it, there's a slight delay because of the call center getting it, and you'll hear kind of the background noise. I just hit end call. And what's interesting about that is I've noticed that if I do that, I don't get a follow-up phone call. Whereas if I just send it to my voicemail, and this isn't a scientific study, but if I just send it to my voicemail, oftentimes that number calls me again a week or two or a couple days later. But if I, you know, inadvertently answer it thinking it was somebody else, and I hear quickly within seconds, oh, this is a call center, and I end it, I don't get a follow-up phone call. I don't think there's a security risk unless you take action, unless you get one of those ones that say, oh, you know, your credit's been compromised, and if you give us $55, we'll take care of it, or this is the IRS and you owe us da-da-da. All those are false. They're robocalls that are trying to get money out of you, and you should ignore them and never do that. Remember, you always want to be the one initiating the process to take care of your financial affairs.
Thanks, Dan. Next question. My bank recognizes my computer address and then automatically fills in password and ID. Is this safe?
Depends where your computer is, right? So if that's a laptop and you travel, I would be a little bit concerned about that, because if someone steals your laptop, then obviously they could mimic what. If it's your computer at home and never goes anywhere, obviously the risk is much lower, obviously depending on what's going on in your home. And so if it's just you or family members or those type of things, I would be anxious if that was my son at his dorm at the university. So that's why you think about, like, can someone else use that and impersonate you just on that device? And then, of course, I think, you know, you can always turn off that feature if you have those risks. And not use it every time. So always keep that in mind. I know with our site, NetX Investor and others, we do the same type of thing with the two-factor authentication, and you can tell the system, look, this is a trusted device, and it asks you the question, and you have the yes or no. And so always keep that in mind. Is it truly a trusted device, and what's those risks that I just mentioned?
All right, we have 2 or 3 more.
I would never do that on a laptop if I travel.
Yeah. 2 or 3 more questions for you here. Thank you so much. This is great. Is there a security risk associated with having your browser on your home computer store passwords and autofill when you log in on a given site? So is there a difference between your browser or your computer, or are they tied together?
That's the same. That's essentially very similar to that other question. You know, oftentimes that might be the browser itself that's storing that information. It'll actually ask you the question whether you want it to store the information, but the same principles apply that I answered the previous question about who else can be on your computer.
And how about email addresses? You know, some of us have 2 or 3 emails that we might be kind of sorting, given, you know, depending on the information. Should we have multiple email addresses, or should we be changing old ones from time to time? What's your feedback on that?
I think the most important thing is, it relates to emails, that you have the 2-factor authentication. So you have the extra security put on, that you never log in to a computer that you don't control with your email. Whenever we've seen someone's email hacked, frequently it's all tied to them traveling and accessing the email somewhere overseas. And so you really, you know, whether you have 1, 2, 3, or 4 addresses, I don't think that matters that much. The reality is, how do you have the security set up, and are you diligent in doing that? And just keep that in mind too, as you travel or do different things, and make sure that you're monitoring the activity. You know, when a fraudster gets into someone's email, they're really good at removing their tracks. So as they try to communicate as that individual, they'll actually delete the sent items, they'll delete the incoming, and they'll be watching it closer than you are. And so that's one of the common statements from someone who's had their email hacked, saying, well, I didn't see anything in my sent items. I don't see me sending that email. It's because the fraudsters already removed it. As soon as they send it, they remove it to try to keep it clean, so that when you log in, you don't notice anything different or anything unique, leading to extra questions.
Okay, great. Let's see, Peter, do you see any more questions coming in here?
Yeah, we actually have a few good ones that I think would benefit the group. Dan, you still good on time? Do you have a few minutes to answer these?
Happy to, yep.
Okay, so I'll kind of walk you through these ones. Somebody asking, in the past, they've used antivirus software on a Mac, but it's interfered with the function a little bit. Do you recommend anything for Macs in particular, or do you feel that their security updates are adequate?
It's a good question. So you know, for the longest time, right, we weren't as worried about Macs and the iOS system. That certainly Windows were the ones that were seeing most of the attacks and virus software. Obviously, that's continued to change in the adoption, but Mac and the overall Apple company does a great job with the iOS and keeping it up to date. And the same too now for Windows, by the way, with their own security. But I will also say that some of the antivirus adds more protection. And so the question I always ask is, well, what are you doing? Like if we're talking about my father and my mother, you know, I think they're good to go with the standard security that's available within the operating system. But, you know, if we're talking about other individuals that might be sharing a lot of files, might be sending, you know, executables back and forth, those are programs, you know, that's where maybe the risk level increases. And so that might be maybe somebody who's at a university or a very active business. And so that's where I'd take a pause on that question and say, okay, well, what are you using? Are you just going to websites and doing email and logging into accounts? You should be, I would think, good with the standard security that comes with that operating system. Make sure it's turned on, make sure it's active, and certainly make sure it's getting all the updates. That is just so critical, that you are processing those updates and making sure that that's being deployed, because it is changing. And as it was mentioned, you know, this is a very fluid and evolving environment. And so when they do updates, there's really no reason to wait. You know, hopefully it doesn't create any other issues, but the reality is they are oftentimes adding new security measures to protect you.
Okay, that makes sense. That's great. Next question here is it okay to
if I could just add real quick, sorry.
Oh, please do.
Just real quick. Also think about who's using the computer. you know, at our office at SSG with our number of associates, we have both, right? We have the updates on the operating system, and we also have the antivirus software that we've deployed across the platform. And that's because we have multiple employees at different user levels. And so that gives us that extra, you know, horsepower, if you will, to further protect our systems in addition to the other things that we do, firewalls and things like that. So that's another part of your question. This is a computer that is used by your whole family and you have all different kinds of user levels. That might be one where you say, you know what, I'm going to add that antivirus too, just to have a little extra protection. So again, think about the user as well.
That's great. So next one, is it okay to have a base password and then add some characters to the beginning and the end of it because everybody has so many websites, so many passwords now? Is it okay to have a base that you use?
Yes to no. The challenge with a base password, it depends how much variability you have after that, right? So if it's like, you know, let's use the word base, B-A-S-E with a capital B, and then you decide to add an exclamation point or you decide to add, you know, the $ or ampersand, that's not going to cut it, especially because there's password programs, hacking programs, that will try all these different renditions. And if the site doesn't have good security where it locks you out for extended period, and they'll just keep hitting it until they figure out what it is. And that's a computer doing it. It's not done by an individual. And so you just want to kind of keep that in mind. And then think about the site. That's the other thing that I think it's always important. It's never one size fits all. So I would encourage you, you know, if there's financial information, I would have that password a little bit more unique than, you know, logging into a travel site or something like that you have out there. Because I do know we have a lot of passwords, but certainly you want to think about, you know, what's the risk level if that one was compromised.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, next one here is thinking back to your Starbucks example. Is it okay to use cellular data from your phone in that example and not use any Wi-Fi? Is that safe?
That's exactly what, yeah, that's what I'm talking about in that last bullet point was use the connection to your cell phone. So yes, using the cellular data, you're now leveraging either Verizon's platform or T-Mobile or AT&T and their security to connect that to your computer. And so, yeah, that's, you know, something that I do often depending on where I am. I rarely use free Wi-Fi, especially in today's world with, you know, not having any risk as it relates to the amount of data you use and those type of things tied to your mobile phone plan.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Next one is somebody looking for some form of professional help, and they just want to know: is there somewhere to go in San Diego to have somebody help you set up these VPNs, these networks, and get passwords set up, or is that something that they should really do personally on their own?
It's a good question, and it's hard to answer it not knowing you and in more details. There's a couple things I would suggest. One, you could actually Google VPN or virtual private network, and you'll see a number of providers that will come up, and certainly you'll see links also to some of the trade publications in the technology space, whether that's, you know, PC Mag or some of the other ones that are out there. CNET is very popular as well. That would be a good starting point. If you really do want some assistance, you can talk to different folks as it relates to some of the Best Buys of the world and the tech folks they have there. And then, of course, there are some smaller technology type companies here in San Diego that do support. They're few and far between these days based on what's gone on with the environment and how things have changed. But those would be some steps that you would start with depending on what you're trying to accomplish and also, you know, how much you want to dive in or just have someone do it for you.
Okay, great. Next question is, are you familiar with Bitdefender for Mac? Is it secure? This person's seen some glitches with it from time to time, and they're just curious about your opinion on it if you're familiar, or if there's a replacement for it if you don't like it.
So I'm not incredibly familiar with it. I know what you're talking about, you know, where it locks down the hardware, or the hard drive, I should say, on the computer. There's Bitdefender, there's others tied to the Windows-based platforms. And of course, it's related to in the event that, you know, it's encrypted in the event that that device is stolen. That's oftentimes what that's all about, is if that device is stolen, is the data encrypted. You want to do the same, of course, on any removable drives as well. So if you have a USB device that you plug in to take data, you always want to make sure that's encrypted in the event that that's stolen. I don't have a strong opinion on ones or the other. Some of those resources I mentioned, like CNET and PC Mag, is also a good place to turn if you're having some of those issues and want to see what else is out there. that's one of the places that I turn when I'm starting to look at new technology.
Okay, perfect. Only a couple more here. So somebody's asking about, they're hearing claims in commercial real estate title fraud. Is that something you've heard about? Is it something you're concerned with? Any thoughts on that?
Not directly. I mean, all my exposure on the real estate side, whether it's commercial properties or real estate for residential, has all been about the transaction and someone trying to insert themselves into the process. And my firm actually has stopped several of those attempts, just simply in the communication process, working with the advisor and working with the client. And where all of a sudden we get a request, and of course we're doing our due diligence and making a phone call. And in one case, we saw that the real estate agent was hacked and trying to impersonate someone to get a transaction done to close escrow that wasn't closing yet. In another case, it was the escrow company that was hacked. And so that's where I've seen most of the exposure as relates to the actual money movement and trying to insert themselves, not on the title side that the question mentioned. So I wouldn't have experience in that area.
Okay. How about fingerprint sign-on? Is that secure? Could there be any exposure that people are unaware of there?
It's an interesting question. For the longest time, that was a big deal, and we saw that quite a bit across a lot of technologies and signing on and those type of things. But it has fallen off a little bit as it relates to newer devices. And my experience with that hasn't been mostly security. It's been more about just simply, the process and the practice and other things that we can do as it relates to protecting devices. So I do know a lot number of people still use them. It still works for them. I just know that also, as I mentioned, you're seeing more security steps as it relates to protecting the device. And certainly you're seeing that now with our phones, right? The facial recognition tied to, if it doesn't recognize you, especially when you have a mask on now, tied to putting in a PIN number. But I want to encourage you always to have a PIN number on your mobile phone. I'm aware of, unfortunately, more than one instance where a phone was hacked and they didn't have a PIN number on it, and the bad person, the thief, was able to do some things as it relates to calling family members, mostly just disruptive. But if you have other things on there, if you've been logging to sites that are saved, that's what they can do too. So always make sure on some of those personal devices, you always have a PIN to get into it, tied to the facial recognition.
Okay, and last one that I have on my end here is, how do you feel about things like the webcams or maybe a listening device like an Alexa? Is there safety there? Should people be turning off webcams, or the famous put duct tape over the webcam when you're not using it? What do you think?
I'd say yes. I'll tell you a couple of things why. So yes, Alexa is always listening, right? It has to listen to everything in order to take the command that you give to play a song or whatever it is. Now, we can debate whether that's being stored or not and whether that bothers you or not, but it is always listening. It has to in order to do its job, right? And the same thing as it relates to webcams and other devices. And I have a really good friend who is very senior in the military. That's probably all I'm going to say about that and about who he is. And I can tell you that given his job, that when he goes to work, he is not allowed to take his mobile phone into the location where he goes to work. They have to lock him up and keep him in a separate place, in literally a locker. And we had a conversation about that, and it was all about the risk of someone hacked into the microphone, the camera, all those things. So we're doing a Zoom right now, and I have a camera. Obviously, you see me. Guess what? When this ends and we say goodbye, I am unplugging this camera. Not because I think there's huge risk, but why take any risk? And so, if you have a little cover that goes over it or whatever you want to do, I just unplug it. And just because I just don't want to take any risk. That's just why it doesn't bother me to have it unplugged. And so those are just things I do. And I do think there is a chance. And so for me, if there's a chance on these webcams and microphones, I want to remove that chance.
That's great to know. I also will be unplugging everything once this is off. So, Jeff,
I'm not trying to, I hope I'm not scaring everybody. I mean, I just want to, as we continue through this, there's a lot of great technology. There's a lot of great security measures. You know, you're working with Wealth Analytics, and they work with us. And there's a lot of steps that we have in place to work together to ultimately protect you. And that's a lot of the effort. And then, but you have your part too, and that's what we've talked about today. So the goal today is not to scare everybody, just understand the risks and extra things we can do. And just by doing some of those things, you do make yourself obviously a much lesser target. And, you know, I tell you, the fraudsters are patient, but they're not, you know, if they can find an easier target, they're going for it. They're not going to waste, you know, they do want to get something done. And so anything you can do to make it a little bit harder, hopefully gets them to go on to the next person.
Thanks, Dan. Absolutely. Thanks, Peter, Belle, Megan. And, you know, we take this so serious at our firm. You know, whenever we send you an email, we attempt to send you a link so you can upload a document safely. You know, again, please avoid sending us, you know, attachments that have sensitive information on them, account numbers, anything like that. You know, we prefer that you upload it securely through our website, and we have a link that we can send you for that too. You know, we use encryption, antivirus, intrusion detection. You know, we have VPNs that we use right now when we're working mobilely from home, even though you're on your Wi-Fi and your router at home is providing you a lot of security. We're also using VPNs. We have a security company, a computer company that we use as well that helps us really identify if there's any holes or gaps that we need to look at. And even as employees, you know, we test our passwords all the time to make sure the strength of the password is strong. And, you know, Dan, I don't know if you have any other feedback on that length of password. I was just talking with our group, and we were talking about how much more secure a 12-character password is than a 6-character. Have you read anything about that, or have any feedback on length of the password and how that can make things much more safer?
That's right, Jeff. Yeah, the longer it is, with the more variability is helpful as it relates to those password hacking programs I mentioned, where they try a brute force attempt where they keep using different password attempts, different renditions of it to guess it, and hopefully they get locked out. But the longer the password, the more variability, that obviously adds more complexity, and so that's always a good thing. And I just want to reiterate what you just shared too about the steps that you guys are taking. Those are all the right things to serving your clients and protecting your systems, and it all is tied to the communication too, and the connection you have with our firm. I know that as we facilitate financial transactions, right, the coordination that happens between your firm and our firm, whether your client is doing a wire request or an ACH, and the secure exchanging that we do, and the benefit of knowing each other. That's the other thing that I think is really important, is your clients, and then of course us, and we're supporting you, and that's an extra level of risk mitigation, because the reality is nobody can walk into your office and impersonate your client. You would know that. Nobody can walk into my office and impersonate you guys. There's so many other situations out there in the world where people do that, where they walk into a branch or a location trying to impersonate somebody. And that's where all the risk starts. And so just to simply client relationship and all the security measures you do and working as you engage with us, they're just such the best step forward in this evolving world of cybersecurity.
We had one last little comment here. Dan, do you know what horse battery staple means or anything like that? This is coming from someone. Do you know what that means, or is this a password reference?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit on that question. What was it again?
Okay. Horse battery staple. Any idea what that means in terms of passwords?
I'm not familiar with that one. There's a good stump there at the end. No, I'm not familiar with that one.
I'm going to ask.
I haven't had any experience with it.
If we can get a little more detail on the question here. But essentially, from everything I read as well, if you think about it, a 6-character password, that's probably something that hackers are looking for, where if you go up to 8 or 12 characters and you're using numbers, letters, they're probably going to move on to someone else, kind of like if your home has a camera out front or whatever it might be, someone's going to move on, is kind of the message that I feel like you're sending here to everyone is if you just step it up, someone is looking for the easy hack and you just don't want to be that person.
Very true. Yes.
All right. Well, we'll take our last question offline here, and we'll find out what that coded detail was for us here, and we'll reflect it back with you, Dan. But again, thanks for joining us today, everyone. We appreciate you tuning in. We went a little bit over, but I hope you found this very informative. And as usual, we're always here to help. Call us at the number here at the local office. You can send us an email at service@wealthanalytics.com. And we will be posting all of our webinars that we do online on our website and social media. So if you want to share this with someone else afterwards, it'll be up and ready for you. So thank you very much. Stay safe out there and have a great day.